Okay, so we were discussing Megillas Tainus, and the Gemara brought yesterday a machlokes between Rav and Rabbi Chanina, who held that bottle Megillas Tainus, so the days where Hesped and Tainus are prohibited are no longer applicable. Yet, I believe it was Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shimon Levi said Loi bottle Megillas Tainus, and the Gemara was bringing rise back and forth. What we did come to a conclusion yesterday was that even if it's bottle Megillas Tainus, the Yom Tov of Chanukah still remains. The Gemara said that's because it's Pesur Minisa, and Rashi explained since it's so proliferated, everybody has accepted it, almost like a deraisa. Even though it's bottle Megillas Tainus, it wasn't bottle for Chanukah. And we're going to learn later today Purim as well, but that will come on to later on. So the Gemara, in the last kasha, the Gemara discussed a simcha that was set up as a day of Yom Tov, which was the day where they finally stopped the minhag of writing Shem Hashem in shtaris. The reason why the minhag was originally put into place was because they wanted to, it was like a knee-jerk reaction to the bittul of the malchus of the Yevonim, who made Klal Yisrael try to totally forget about the Rebbeinu Shalom. So they decided that they're going to put the Rebbeinu Shalom's name everywhere, even in stars. But then the Chachamim realized that it's not appropriate because once the star is no longer relevant, it's paid up, those stars would be thrown out, and then the Shem Hashem would be mutal b'bezoyim. So that day was a happy day, and that day they said no Titus, no Hesped. Correct the Gemara. That was later. Apparently, the Gemara assumes this was much later on, after the Megillas Tainus would have been bottled. And if you hold Megillas Tainus as bottled, we're eliminating all the previous dates where there's a reason to have simcha. Why would they establish a new date? So the Gemara answered, your timing is off. In the last line at the bottom of Yud Chosam Beis, the Gemara said, Hacha b'may haskinon bizman shebeis hamikdash kayim. This occurred while the Beis Hamikdash was still kayim, while Megillas Tainus was still active. So therefore, you can't ask me, Akasha, why did they make it if they were mevatel these Yom Tovim, so to speak? Because they weren't mevatel them yet. The question of whether or not Megillas Tainus was bottled or not wasn't until later. Frek the Gemara, what was the day that we just discussed was established as that day of Simcha? That was the day, that was the third day of Tishrei. It says the Gzeir was on the third day of Tishrei, but till Sabbat Tishrei, that was the day that they had this announcement. We're right at the top of Yud Testament base. The Tepech lay the Hava Leyoim Shenerek boy Gedalia ben Achikam. Why do we need to say that there was a special Yom Tov made because of the fact that they stopped putting names in stars, the name of Hashem in stars? It was Tom Gedalia. And Rashi says on the top line, if the Beis Hamikdash was still standing at the time of this celebration, it would have been the Yom Tov of Tom Gedalia. Because if we remember yesterday, we quoted the pasuk that says, all of the Tanaisim, while the Beis Hamikdash was standing, were Mayadim Toivim. So why do they need to create another reason for the same halacha? Anyway, it was already aser the hesped of the Tainus. Amarav zokt Rav lo nitzracha ela la'eser eshalafanav, by making this day a special day because they stopped writing the name of Hashem in shtaros. It also made it aser the day before as well. Like nitzracha zokt Rashi hada kabul b'Megillas Tainus al davar zeh. The reason why they had to establish a separate Yom Tov because of the bittul of putting Hashem's name in shtaris, because we're also, because of this, prohibiting the day before this day, the erev Yom Tov, is also aser b'tainus. The days that were in Megillas Tainus, not only were those days Yom Tovim, but before and after as well. Now there's a long Tosfos here, and Tosfos seems to say that the before and after is only aser b'tainus, but it's not aser behesped. The hesped is only aser the day of the Yom.
So is Gedalia a Yom Tov or a Tainus?
During the second Beis Hamikdash period, it was a Yom Tov, before and after was a tainus. It is a tainus. Zok the Gemara, Amarav, Lanitzach Elasa Shalafana. Frank Tavor, Shalafana Nami, typically, the Havel Yoim Shalacha Rosh Chodesh. The second day of Tishrei is the day after Rosh Chodesh Tishrei. Rosh Chodesh Tishrei is a Moed. So if it's a Moed, the day after a Moed, Israchag also has an Isser B'Tainus. Zok the Gemara, Rosh Chodesh Deraisa. The Kedusha of Rosh Chodesh, the Yom Tov of Rosh Chodesh is a Deraisa. Uderaisa Leboy Chizit. The only reason why they expanded the Isser Tainus to the day before and the day after is only because they wanted to give Chizuk to the Rabbanim the Kiyom Tov. But a Deraisa the Kiyom Tov doesn't need any type of Chizuk. And Rashi says, Uderaisa Leboy Chizuk, lesser Lefanu B'La'achra. Avol Yemei Megillas Tainus the Rabbanim. But the Yom Tovim that were established by the Rabbanim in the Megillas Tainus, they are only Midrabanan, and therefore it's Tzrichen Chizuk ki heichi de loy leisi l'samis b'Yom Tov atzmai. In order to make sure that people won't fast on the actual Yom Tov, they expanded the Isser to the day before and the day after. The Tanya we learned back into the Gemara. Hayom ha'ilak shuvim of Megillas Tainus. Those days listed in Megillas Tainus, asurin bein lefneim bein lacharim. They're also side the day before and side the day after. But Shabbosai, so the Yom Tovim, which are Isurim Deiraisa, Yom Tovim Deiraisa, Heim Asurim, the days themselves are also behesped of Tainus, Lefnei Mulachareim Mutar. Ma'hefresh Bein Zelazeh. Why is it that we're so makbid on the Megillas Tainus Yom Tovim to expand them to the day before and after, and not by the Deiraisas? So tomorrow, Alalu Divrei Torah, the Yom Tovim Deiraisa are Divrei Torah, the Ein Divrei Torah Tzrichim Chizir. But Alalu, those of the Megillas Tainus are Divrei Seifim, the Divrei Seifim Tzrichim Chizir. So, Frank the Gemara, we're still focusing on day number 3. Why did they need to make a special Yom Tov on day number 3 of Tishrei? Because of this bittul of writing Hashem's name in stars. I'm sorry, the day before. The day before, the second day of Tishrei. Why? We said you're not going to answer it because it's the day after Rosh Chodesh, but why don't you answer it? Because it's the day before Tzon Gedalia. And the day before Tzon Gedalia is one of the lesser Yom Tovim of Megillas Tainus. So therefore, it should require the Isser to fast the day before as well. Rabashi, Gedalia ben Achikim Divrei Kabbalah. It's not the Rabbanim. It might not be Meforish in the Torah, but a Divrei Kabbalah and the Divrei Nevi'im, the Divrei Kabbalah ke Divrei Torah Damu. And Divrei Kabbalah is just like Divrei Torah, and therefore it does not need Chizuk. It does not need Chizuk. Zok to Gemara. Mosif Rav Tuvi Bar Masna. Rav Tuvi Bar Masna had a shayla.
Interesting that they don't need chizuk, because the whole destruction, the whole Churban of Bayis came because they did not listen to anybody.
I hear. Okay. So Mosif Rav Tuvi Bar Masna. The Esim Utmanya Bey, on the 28th day of Adar, Rashi Ba'adar Koi, and this is quoting from the Megillas Tainus, this Asas Besurta Tavstali Yadai, a good news came to Klal Yisrael. The news was the Lo Ye'idan Mi'iraisa. They don't have to move away from the Torah. Rashi says, Shalo Yitztachu L'natik Atzim Min HaTorah. So there was a gzeira up until then that they're not allowed to keep the Torah. And then the decree came down that from now on they are allowed to keep the Torah. What was the story? Shegazra Hamalchus Gzeira Shlo Yasku b'Torah. The Malchus made a Gzeira, Hashem Yirachem, that we shouldn't be able to be Isaac in Torah. V'shelo Yamulu Espeneim, and that we're not allowed to do Milah, and V'shechalu Shabbos, and we have to be Mechal Shabbos. Ma'asa Yehuda ben Shmuel v'Chaver. What did Yehuda ben Shmuel and his friends do? They decided to ask from a goiter, but someone who they trusted, who had a sympathetic ear, who also understood the workings of the government. And they asked from an important woman who was familiar with all of the Gedolei Roimi how they should handle this issue. Amar Lahem, she told them, Boyu v'ifkinu b'layla, go make a Hafgana. We think that the Israelis, they invented the Hafgana. The Hafgana was an Eitzah from a Roman matronisa. She said you should make a hafgana, but when should you do it? Balayla. You should do it at night. Why is it Rashi? Go scream in the streets and in the marketplaces. If you cry and you show how bitter it is to you, then the Sarim of Rome will have rachmanis. So they did exactly that.
But they should hear.
Exactly. I think Rashi says so later. The Tosfos say if they do it at night, then it's easy to hear because at night things are quiet, people are home, so they would be impacted by it. Oh, Shishma, I knew I saw that somewhere. I knew I didn't make it
I
up.
thought the Hafganas were at night so you can see the garbage bins burning better.
Yeah, that's also part of it. It's to get attention, to make sure that our protest is noticed. Amru, and this is what they said. Ishamayim, and Rashi says it means Laman Hashem. Laman Hashem, Lo Yachechem Anachnu, are we not brothers? V'lo b'nei Av Echad Anachnu, v'lo b'nei Em Achas Anachnu. We're all children of the Besnoyach, of Adam. I don't know. We're all sons and daughters. We're all the children of one person, and we're all the children of a mother and of a father. Anachnu manishtaninu mikol umma v'loshein. Why are we different from any other nation? You believe in a non-racist open government, so why are you singling us out? That you're being gozer upon us terrible gzeres. And it worked. It worked. The Roman Sarim heard ubitlam, and they were mevatel, and they let the Yidden fear zich the Yidden. And that day was made into a great jump. Frank the Gemara, the same kash as we had before. If you hold like the Shita that Megillus Tainus is no longer relevant, we don't keep these special days and avoid saying Tachanun and being maspid on those days. They've already been mevatel all of the earlier Yom Tovim. Would they now make new gzeres? And if you're going to want to claim that this story also occurred before we're discussing whether or not the Megillus Tainus was butler or not, that cannot be, because now we have a name. We have Rabbi Yehuda ben Shemua. But Rabbi Yehuda ben Shemua was Talmidei Shel Reb Meir. He was a Talmud of Reb Meir. Reb Meir Basar Hachiyava, and we know Reb Meir was after the Churban. Itnan Kleis Chukish and Nikfu. The hit of L'Soichan Ev. So before we learn this, which gets us into a little bit of a different sugya, I just want to see Rashi on what we have here. Reb Meir Basar Churban Hava, Rashi gives us a little bit of a history. Kamadoirish. Reb Meir was several generations after the Churban. We know that the Beis Hamikdash was chorb in the lifetime of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rabbi Eliezer Talmidei. Rabbi Eliezer was a Talmud of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rabbi Kiva Talmidei Rabbi Eliezer, and Rabbi Kiva was Rabbi Eliezer's Talmud. Kidamrina and Bishil Arba Misas. Rabbi Meir Talmidei Rabbi Kiva. So Rabbi Meir was like 3 generations of Talmidim after Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. So clearly he was a considerable amount of time after the Churban Bayisheni. Kidamrina b'per kama de Erevin. Kol mokim shata moitze. Mishum Rabbi Shmuel Amar Talmud Echad l'fnei Rabbi Kiva. Any other Rabbi Meir. Whenever you see Mishum Rabbi Shmuel Amar Talmud Echad l'fnei Rabbi Kiva, it was Rabbi Meir. So Rabbi Meir was a Talmud of Rabbi Kiva, who was a Talmud of Rabbi Eliezer, who was a Talmud of Yochanan ben Zakkai. So it's for sure much later. It's not. How do we know that Rabbi Yehuda ben Shemua Talmid is Rabbi Meir Hava? The case was so we had a keli that was made out of glass, and it became tamei, and shenitmu, it became tamei. But not when you made a hole in it. Why? To make it ois keli. The nakvan l'tayim mitamasim. By making a hole in this glass keli, it makes it ois keli. It loses its status of a keli, and therefore it loses its status of tumah. Zok to Gemara, what did he do? The hit of the at the end of the day, you needed to fix it, right? You didn't want to break it permanently, so you melted some lead and you dripped it into that hole. So now the keli can be used again. Aver Ashis Ferris lead listimus and nekev to plug the hole. So Yehuda Amar Rabbi Shimon Gamliel said, Yehuda ben Shmuel metame mishum Rab Meir. Yehuda ben Shmuel metame loimer shechazu l'tumas on Yeshana. When you fill that hole, it makes the keli go back to its original status and it gets its tumah again. Even though after this occurred, you were tired, you made the hole, you fixed it, even if it didn't touch tumah again, it goes back to the original tumah that it had before you made the hole. Even though we know that this does not occur, once it becomes Torah, because there's a hole in it, fixing it will not bring back the original tumah. The only time the Rabbanon said that the tumah goes back, we derive for sure there's no tumah. But the only time even the Rabbanon said that it goes back to its original tumah is only in a metal keli, not a glass keli. So why is this glass keli? Why is Rabbi Yehuda ben Shmuel saying in the name of our mayor that this glass keli goes back to its original tumah? Haninami hoyelva Avram Amidoi. What's making the whole keli into a keli? This little drop of metallic lead. Because without it, you don't have a keli. So since it's the piece of lead and metal that's holding it all together, we're going to give this keli the status of a metal keli, and then it'll fall under the Rabbanic Gzeira that it goes back to its original tumah. We focus on the one thing that's holding it all together, and that is this piece of lead. Now, what we're proving from this Mishnah merely is that Rabbi Yehuda ben Shmuel said it over in the name of her mayor. That's all we were trying to prove, that he was her mayor's Talmud. But now we got ourselves into a new shaila, and that is a glass keli that has a hole in it. It was tumah before. You made a hole to remove the tumah. If you fill it with metal, does it take on the tumah again? That's how Rashi went in his first shot. There are other shotim of how to learn this Gemara. So the Gemara says, the Chachamim argue on this that Yehuda ben Shmuel said over in the name of his Rebbe Meir, and they say tired. Why do they say tired? So Rashi tells us the ikroi klis chuchasen, because this is really a glass keli. One dot of lead not making it into a metal keli. You don't go. You don't follow. You don't give the keli a status of the little piece of lead that's holding it together. And that the next thing is Rashi's second shot. That he has a shayla b'chlal that could become tomei because glass doesn't become tomei. But Rashi doesn't like the shot. So Zok Gemara. Now we have a stira because we have one brisa that seems to indicate quite clearly that they were not Mavata Megillas Tainus, and that's why they were able to make this additional Gzeira on the 28th day of Chodesh Adar, where they celebrated the fact that the Gzeira to stop Klal Yisrael from practicing Yiddishkeit was nullified. And you see they set up a new Yom Tov, so it must be Loi Batla Megillas Tainus. So it's shver on the Shittas that we learned earlier, who say that it was Batla Megillas Tainus. So it's shver on Rav and Rab Chanina, who say Batla Megillas Tainus, because according to them, how could they make this new Gzeira on the 28th day of Adar? So tomorrow you're right, Tanoi. In fact, it's a machlokas Tanoi. Everybody agrees that there's a Tana who holds that Loi Batla Megillas Tainus. Question is if there's also a Tana who holds Batla Megillas Tainus. The Tana we learned. These days listed in Megillas Tainus, Bein Bizman Shabeis HaMikdash Kayim, Bein Bizman She'ein Beis HaMikdash Kayim Asurim Divrei Reb Meir. Clearly, it was Loi Batla. Rabbi Yosy Omer Bizman Shabeis HaMikdash Kayim Asurim. Why? Because Mipnei Shesimcha Hilahem. It was a simcha for them. Ein Beis HaMikdash Kayim Utar and Mipnei She'evel Hilahem, because it switches back to Eva. So you see clearly there's a machlokes whether or not it was Batla Megillas Tainus. Zok to Gemara, what is halacha l'maisa? So the Gemara comes up with a clear directive. The halacha is Batla. The halacha is it was Batla Megillas Tainus. The halacha is a loy Batla. The halacha is also they were Batla Megillas Tainus. A clear and sharp directive. In fact, the Gemara, you're also right. So kasha hilchasa. It's a stira. So the Gemara loy kasha. Kan the Chanukah Purim kan b'shayoynei. When we say loy Batla Megillas Tainus, that's referring to Chanukah and Purim. And in fact, till this very day, Chanukah and Purim are Yom Tovim that we celebrate, and we're mocked with no Tainus, no Hesped, but all the other days listed in the Megillas Tainus we no longer have. So that takes care of the Hilchas HaHilchas, but it's still machlokes to them. Zok to Gemara.
Yehuda ben Shmuel.
Yehuda ben Shmuel was a Talmud of Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai.
First of all, he wasn't Rebbe Yehuda ben Shmuel. The Gemara quotes many times without Rebbe and without the title of Rebbe. Just Yehuda ben Shmuel. Number two, I'm just wondering, there was only one Yehuda ben Shmuel? There's only one Yosy ben Shlomo? Like,
I guess the Gemara must know that we're talking about the same one, but yeah. It's a good point. Zok Gemara, Al Elul mepnei Rosh Hashanah. We send out shluchim to tell everybody when Rosh Chodesh Elul was, so that we should at least have a closer range of when Rosh Hashanah is. Al Tishrei, in Tishrei you send out shluchim as well, mepnei takanas hamayados, so that we'll get our Yom Tovim at the right time. And Rashi says, so people shouldn't be concerned that maybe they fasted the wrong day of Yom Kippur, or they didn't do the mitzvah sukkah on the right day. So this way they'll know exactly what day was established as the first day of Tishrei. Correct the Gemara. Since they're already going out for Elul, Tishrei lamalu. Why do they need to go out for Tishrei? Dilma Arula Elul. If it's because you might suggest that maybe Elul this year had 30 days instead of 29 days, which would then push Rosh Hashanah off a day, and would push off Yom Kippur a day and Sukkot a day. The Amar Hafgana Bar Kahana Amar Hafgana Bar Kahana said in the name of Rav, Ezra Ve'ela, from the time of Ezra on, which we had many times, Loi Matzinu Elam Ober. We never had Elam Ober. And Tosha says on this nusach you could be medayik that in Ezra's days they did have an Elam Ober. But I'll call upon them, we never have it. So if we never have it, why do we need to send shluchim out for it? There's a pretty good assumption that it's not going to happen. No. The reason why it never happened, because it wasn't never required. But technically, if something would come up where it would be necessary to push it off, and Rashi told us the Gemara soon is going to discuss, the Gemara on the next daf is going to discuss the reasons why we would want to push this off, then Marvinu would. Marvinu Zok to Gemara. So if that's the case, you do have to send out shluchim, because if you don't send out shluchim, it's possible that one year there'll be a need to push off Rosh Hashanah by one day. Correct Gemara, but if you push off Rosh Hashanah by one day, hamakalkal Rosh Hashanah, you're going to mess up Rosh Hashanah. And Rashi is going to say, why are you makalkal Rosh Hashanah? The nimsha shalo yasu b'nei agoyla kalocha im avernel. If we end up adding an extra day to El, people who are far away, who won't get the message right away, they're going to end up keeping Rosh Hashanah on the day they normally expect to do it, which means they're going to be celebrating Rosh Hashanah a day early. So how could you do that? It's better that Rosh Hashanah should be miskalkal in the places where they're far away, but we shouldn't mess up all the other mayadim if in fact we require to push it off. Deikadami, and if you look at the words of the Mishnah itself, that's exactly what the Mishnah seems to be saying. Tekatani al Tishrei, it's because you want to be misakan the mayadim. So you see, that's what it's all about. It's to protect the integrity of the other Yom Tovim. And again, what the protection is, the Gemara is going to discuss later. Shemamina. Beautiful. The Al Kislev Mipnei Chanukah. On Kislev, we send out shluchim because of Chanukah. The Al Adar Mipnei Purim. Frek the Gemara. The Ilun is Abrashim. What if there was a second Adar added? Zok the Gemara Yoitzin Af Al Adar Sheni. You'd have to send out shlichim again for Adar Sheni Mipnei Purim because of Purim. Loi Katani. So Loi Katani. Our Mishnah doesn't say that. Our Mishnah only lists off Adar in a regular year. You send out shluchim for Adar, but our Mishnah doesn't say that maybe if there's an Adar Sheni, you should send out a second set of shluchim for Adar Sheni to let the people know when Purim is in the second Adar. Why don't you have to do that? Our Mishnah must not be consistent with the Shita of Rebbe. The Tanya we learned. Rebbe said in this Abra Hashana, if they added an extra Adar, then Yoitzin Af Al Adar Hasheni, the Purim. You'd have to send out again shluchim for Adar Sheni because Purim is an Adar Sheni, and people need to know which day Purim is on. Zok Gemara. So let's say that is the machlokes between Rebbe, who says Yoitzin Af Al Adar Sheni, and our Mishnah that doesn't say Yosy Nafal Adar Sheni. The Mar Savar called mitzvahs and Haggis B'Sheni, Haggis B'Rishon. Our Mishnah holds that all of the mitzvahs that you're supposed to do in Adar Sheni, you could be Yosy Adar Rishon. So since you've already learned the Megillah and you've already Pravet Purim on the first Adar, you don't have to do it again. So we have no need to send people out. Umar Savar called mitzvahs and Haggis B'Sheni, Ein Haggis B'Rishon. And the other Mandamar, Rabbi holds that you won't be able to be Mekayim the mitzvah by doing it on the Rishon. So you have to make sure they know when Adar Sheni started so that people can be yoy to the mitzvah of Purim on the second Adar. Zok to Gemara, before we go back to Gemara, we have a major problem. Because regardless, they have to go out for Adar Sheni. Because they have to tell people that it's Adar, not Nisan. Otherwise, people are going to keep Pesach. So what's the difference if you're yoytz already, the mitzvah of Purim? You have to send people out. They should know it's Nisan. So that's Tosfos' kasha. It's a beautiful kasha. So let's see Tosfos Masnisin Deloy Kerebi. So just a little bit lower than when we are in the Gemara. Masnisin Deloy Kerebi. The timer freak Tosfos will the Tana be done according to our Tana that you don't send out shluchim for Adar Sheni. Even the Leilafki Aladar Sheni. Since you're not sending out shluchim to tell people when Adar Sheni started, hey chiyadu shenis abra Hashana. How are the people that live far and wide even going to know that there's a second Adar? Bishlama im ivru kodem Adar. Bishlama, if the decision of Bezdin to add a second Adar was already decided in Shvat, so then Yechalim lahidiyam ayidei shluchei Adar. When the shluchim come out to tell you when Adar Rishon started, they can tell you, by the way, there's going to be an Adar Sheni. We're not going to come next month, but you should know there's going to be an Adar Sheni. Aval mervu achakach, but we know you could make a second Adar till the last day of the first Adar. So if that occurred, then that happened after the shluchim were already sent for the Adar Rishon. So hey chiyadi, how in the world are people going to know? We know for sure, we learned before, that you could be Ma'abri Deshon, you could add a second Adar till the end of Adar, and everybody agreed to at least the Purim. You could, right? We had a Shiloh, maybe after Purim we can, because people are already preparing for Pesach. But I'll call upon them, how in the world are people going to know? The Islam is no problem at all. Even the Shluchim, Yoitzin, Al Nisan, the Shluchim are going to be coming out for Nisan, right? Memela Yadi, is Yagira Shchodesh. The ain't Shluchim Yoitzin, Imkein Hashana Muberes. What's going to happen is Adar Sheni, no one's going to come. 2 weeks into Adar Sheni, no one's going to come. So they're going to tell them, hey, if Pesach is now, for sure Shluchim would have come. Since Shluchim didn't come, it must be that this is Adar Sheni. So all of the women who worked so hard to cook for Pesach and to prepare all their matzahs, they'll say, okay, now we could put it in the freezer because we have another month until Pesach comes. But I'll call upon them, that's how people would know. People would know because no one shows up.
Not being allowed to
Yeah, but it would also be a month to relax because everyone would be ready already. Because they don't, the people who normally only get notified the Erev Yom Tov because they're far away, they're going to find out Erev Pesach. They're going to find out Erev Pesach that Pesach is not there. And all the Yeshiva Bachim who came home for Ben Nismanim are going to be very excited that they have a double Ben Nismanim.
I can't help but wonder if there were many communities in those days that actually made Pesach when there was no Pesach. And, they just never found out. They just got confused.
Well, what if they were more than a 2-week travel from Yerushalayim? Like, what if they lived in Africa or in America or in Europe? I don't know how they found out.
In those days when they were in Rosh. I mean, now everything is automatic.
And now it's
And it's
counted.
not just now. It's from when was everything automatic? I mean, even the days of the Amoraim.
From Hill, I think, Hill.
From Hillel too, right? The second Hillel.
So let's see the Gemara right here.
even before that, they had the calculation, when Rosh Chodesh was.
The Gemara discusses it a little bit later. They did have calculations, but even though they had calculations, it didn't matter because if the chiyuv is to be mekadosh al pi re'iyah, so you could have calculations, but if nobody saw it, they can't be mekadosh. Now we don't have mekadosh al pi re'iyah.
If they know when the.
As a matter of fact, if you have a bezdin, if you have a Sanhedrin, you cannot follow the calendar. We only follow the calendar today. If you have Sanhedrin, you have to be mekadosh al pi re'iyah. And this was one of the factors in the massive machlokes between the Maharibe Rab and the Mahalbach. the Maribe Rav wanted to reestablish smicha, and he was in Tvas, I
Oh,
believe.
right, yeah.
He was in Tvas, and the first person that they wanted to give smicha to, I think, was the Maralbach, who was they ended up giving it to Rabbi Cairo, but they wanted to give it to Maralbach, who was one of the Chacham Yerushalayim. The Chacham Yerushalayim rejected this whole premise, and they say it was a little personal. Haytach you and Tzfas are going to dictate. We're in Yerushalayim, we dictate. So it got to be a very, very nasty machloikas between the Maribe Rav and the Ralbach. It was about basically Nadik and the Rambam. The Rambam says if Roiv Chachmi Yisrael and Maskim, if this person has smicha, that will reestablish the chain of smicha. So in the Vikuch back and forth, one of the tiniest brought up was if you reestablish smicha, then once again we're mechuyev to be mekadesh the chodesh al piriyah. And that's going to cause huge problems. So that was one of the factors that came in over there. So it's better we shouldn't even have a bezin, even if you could make a bezin, because I don't remember what. But the problems would be we wouldn't. People all over the world wouldn't know when the Yom Tov was. That was also before WhatsApp.
Why didn't the Beshefer ever do that before? Why did
Maybe the people lived closer around, but now we were spread all over the world.
Anyways, outside in the wall, you keep 2 days Yom Tov.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter.
But it was going to be relevant. I don't remember exactly why it was relevant, but it was part of the problem. What?
Things don't go as easy as they used to. Doctor here.
Yeah. Okay, so let's see the Gemara weiter. Yeah. So I remember I learned once through the whole parsha, but I remember that came up. I don't remember the details. That makes it interesting.
I'm in elementary school. Ron is in university. Ron is there in university.
Gewaltig. Okay, so let's see the Gemara weiter. So we said maybe the machlokes is gufa if kol on mitzvahs and I guess b'sheni if the negus b'rishon not. Maybe that's a machlokes. So tomorrow no. The chula alma mitzvahs and negus b'sheni ain't negus b'rishon. Everybody agrees that the mitzvahs that are negus b'sheni ain't negus b'rishon, meaning you would have to keep Purim again. V'hacha b'rishon k'mefari. Here the machlokes is about a completely different question. It's as follows: the Tanya, Kama Iber Shana Lamed Yon. When we add an extra adar, how many days does that extra adar have? It's always 30 days. Rab Shimon ben Gamliel Omer Chodesh. Rab Shimon ben Gamliel says it's a Chodesh, and at this point the Gemara assumes that means 29 days. Correct Gemara. So then, what's the problem? Maishna Lamed Yadi. What's the difference? If it's Lamed, if every time we add a month, you're adding 30 days. So once again, people will be able to figure it out. And therefore, they won't have to send shluchim. Chodesh nami yadi. Chodesh also yadi. So the question here that we're discussing is not how many days the second Adar will have, it's how many days the first Adar will have. And Rashi says, we're talking about Kama Iber Hashana, is Yimei Adar Rishon, She'oiseh Iber Lashana. It's the Adar Rishon that we consider the extra month. So if it's 30 days or 29 days, so if you know it's always 30 days, then you don't need to send shluchim for Adar Sheni because people automatically know when Rosh Chodesh is. Zok the Gemara, if it's Chodesh, it's 29 days. So for Gemara, Maishna Lamed Yadi Chodesh Nami Yadi. You want to make the shaila of whether or not you send that shluchim for Adar Sheni, Toli, in your Shimon ben Gamliel and the Tanakama. Regardless, according to each of them, you shouldn't have to send out shluchim because they will know that Yom Lamed Aleph or Yom Lamed is the day of the Kiddush HaChodesh. Mar Papa, Man Damer Chodesh, Rab Shimon Gamliel says Chodesh, it means Rotza Chodesh, Rotza Shloshim. So according to Rab Shimon Gamliel, they were able to decide if it would be 30 days or if it would be 29 days. So according to him, they had to send a shluchim by the Sheni so people will know when Purim is. Mashenkin, according to the Tanakama, where everybody would automatically know, because it's always going to be that the first Adar is 30 days, you don't need to send out shluchim. Zok Gemara Vayt. Hey, Rabbi Shua ben Levi, Mishum Kahala Kedisha Yerushalayim. Rabbi Shua ben Levi said over testimony in the name of the Kahala Kedisha Yerushalayim, Al Shnei Adarim, on the two Adars, Shemakachem Oisam B'Yom Ibureim. They always become Rosh Chodesh on the day of 30, on the 30th day. Meaning, both Shvat and Adar Rishon will only have 29 days. Lememra. I'm sorry. Yom Shlosh Yom Iber. It's both others. I'm sorry. Both others will only have 29 days because you make the Rosh Chodesh on day 30. Remember, and Rashi, this is not a kasha. Remember, the Chasrin Avdinon Malay Noyabim. This seems to be saying that both others only have 29 days. Lafuke Mididarish Rab Nachman Bar Chisda. This is going to be a departure from what Rab Nachman Bar Chisda darshan, and he said as follows: Hey Rab Simoy Mishum Chagai Chayu Malachi. Rab Simoy said over in the name of Nevi'im Al Shnei Adorim about the two others. Shimratu LaSoisam Shnei Milayan Oisen. If you want them each to have 30 days, that's fine. Shneim Chasein Oisen. And Echad Malay, Echad Chaser Oisin, but Rashi says the first one would be Malay and the second one would be Chaser. And this is how they used to Firzach. Umishum Rabbeinu Amru, in the name of Rabbi, they said, La'olam Echad Malay, Echad Chaser. You always assume that the first Adar has 30 days, and the second Adar has 29 days, Achi Yivodalach, Shehukva, Rosh Chodesh Bismanoi, unless you know for sure what day they said. Rashi says what that means is, or Rabbeinu is Rav, not Rebbe. Until people come from Eretz Yisrael and report to you, so by default you have to assume that the first Adar had 30 days. However, if Adam come and tell you that they made Rosh Chodesh earlier, then you could accept that. They sent a letter to Ma'ukva to ask him the following shayla. Adar hasamach l'nisan la'olam chas. The second Adar will always have only 29 days. Mashav Rab Nachman, correct Rab Nachman on this tape. Al shnei chadashim machal Shabbos. There are 2 months where you could be machal Shabbos for. And what does it mean you could be machal Shabbos for? It means as follows. So Rashi, machal Shabbos, Edom sharo asalavana b'chidusha. Adam saw the new moon, so they have to run to Bezin to say testimony that they saw the new moon. There's 2 months where they're allowed to be Mechal Shabbos to come to Bezin and say that they saw the new moon. Why? Dafka these 2 months, Nisan and Tishrei. All the Yom Tovim are hinged on when the Rosh Chodesh of these 2 months are. The at this point in the Gemara, we're assuming that Chilula the Shara Rachmana, the reason why we're allowing Chilul Shabbos is Mishum the Kfiyas Yacha the Firiyas Halavanahu. We're assuming that they establish Rosh Chodesh based on the moon. So unless these Edom can get there, it'll mess up the dates. In Malay, in Chasar Chasar. Sorry? Tchum is actually the Rabbanon, but it's based on the Deraisa. So we're considering it like a Deraisa.
The Deraisa, how could they do that? How could the Chachamim do that? The Rabbanon, I understand.
Well, I guess it's a mitzvah of Kiddush Chodesh.
We never have such an idea that the Torah somehow doesn't work.
We can send, so doctors and midwives can go out of the
That's
No,
because we have a class.
you can cut the Omer. You can cut the Omer on Shabbos, right? There, when there's a tzivah to do something like Kiddush Chodesh, maybe it's like a Shabbos. So much of Reb Nachman, al shnei chadashim mechal on the Shabbos, al mishav Tishrei. So Yamet b'shleima zimnin mala zimnin chaser. If you're going to tell me that the month of Adar Sheni could sometimes have 30 days and sometimes have 29 days, well, mishum hachim mechal, that's why you'll be mechal Shabbos, because you need to know when it was. If they saw it on day 30, they have to come say Eidos that today is Rosh Chodesh. If they don't come and say that they saw the moon today and therefore Yom Shloshim is going to be Rosh Chodesh, Bezdin is not going to make Rosh Chodesh until tomorrow. And they're going to take a month that really should have only been 29 days because Lamaisha they saw the moon, and they're going to make it into 30 days. If you're going to tell me that the last Adar before Nisan is always Chaser, then Amay Mechalelina. Why should you be Mechal Shabbos? We know what day it is anyway. It's default that it's automatically the day 30 is going to be the day of Rosh Chodesh. So Rashi, even if Edom don't come, we'll be Mekadosh because we know it's 29 days. So tomorrow, you know why? The mitzvah lekadesh ala re'iyah. Al real Edim. This is the Chodesh is Alachem Rosh Chodashim Kazer Re'ei B'Kadesh. So it's a mitzvah d'iraisa to be mekadosh with Edim, and then there's a mitzvah d'iraisa to be mekadosh with Edim. We're mechal Shabbos. Iko da'amri. There's another nusach of what happened over here. Omer Rab Nachman, Afanan Nami Tanina. We also learned al Shnei Chadashim Mechal Shabbos al Nisav al Tishrei. Yamid B'Shleima la'Edim Chaser. If you say it's always chaser, mishum hachi mechalalinan, then I would understand why you're mechalal the mitzvah l'kadosh halariyah. To show you that there's a mitzvah in the kadosh halariyah. That's why you have to, and that's why you need it. That's why you can be mechal Shabbos. Aliyamrit zimnin malay zimnin chaser. If you're going to tell me sometimes it's malay, sometimes it's chaser, amay mechalalina. Why should you be mechal? If it's day 30 and they saw the moon, why should they be mechal to go run to bed? If it has to be Rosh Chodesh today because it's Eilam Chaser, so we need Adam to make it Rosh Chodesh today. But if it doesn't have to be today, because we could say sometimes it could be Malay, so then let them wait till tomorrow. A big deal. So it'll be an extra day in the month, and then you can avoid doing Mechal Shabbos. So Iyamar Zimnin Malay and Zimnin Chaser, my Mechalin, Na'avar Edna of Nick Shalamacher. Let them not come today. They'll come tomorrow. Big deal. Anyway, the month's allowed to be 30 days. So tomorrow, yeah, you're right. That would work out really well if the 30th day of the month was Shabbos. Or you say, don't come today, come tomorrow. But the next day was Shabbos, and they saw it the next day. There they have to be Melchal Shabbos, the mitzvah Lakadosh al Hariyah. There's a mitzvah, even though today will for sure be Rosh Chodesh anyway, but there's a mitzvah that it should be al Piriyah, and that's why they could be Melchal Shabbos to come. Okay, we'll stop here.
My uncle one time wanted to bring
Shkoyach, have a good day, Venti. Shkoyach, Ephraim.
so important.
Yeah.